Should you get with the program? That's the subject of this week's Solid Signal podcast. The week is October 15th, 2018, and let's dive into why I'm asking that. You know, I talk to a lot of folks who have DirecTV satellite service or who have Dish satellite service, and these are people who have had this service for a very, very long time. Some of them coming on 25 years. DirecTV first rolled out in 1994, and I know a few people who were there practically at the very beginning. And for the most part, people like to be on the cutting edge or the bleeding edge. This is pretty normal for the kind of people that I hang around with. But lately, I've started noticing that there's a class of people, a group of folks, as it were, who are asking questions more like, is it really worth it to upgrade to a Genie 2? Or do I really have to change my system over to Swim? Or is the Hopper 3 really the most important thing for me? These are questions that I never would have heard 5-10 years ago, but they seem to be creeping in more and more. And of course, I think it's normal and natural when you have people getting older. I mean, if you were 40 years old in 1994, well, hey, you know, you're 64 now, and your point of view on being an early adopter may change, and that's perfectly natural. Even I, who have been out there way on the edge, occasionally ask myself if it's time to step off. You know, this just happens to folks, and if it's happened to you, if you've just decided that the cutting edge is really no longer where you want to be, totally get you, totally understand. But let's talk about some of the technological reasons why I think you should get with the program for DirecTV and Dish. And by get with the program, I mean, you know, upgrade to the latest and greatest stuff and leave behind some of your older technologies. You know, you can look at, let's look specifically, by the way, at DirecTV, because DirecTV is where a lot of our listeners are coming from. And so I'd rather really focus on that, although a lot of these same things apply to Dish in kind of other, you know, you just need to kind of change the names, as it were, but the intent is still the same. But if you look at DirecTV, there were kind of three eras. You could break it down farther than that, but before about 2007, you could look at it as a standalone era. You had DirecTV in multiple rooms, and each receiver was its own thing. And then from about 2007 to about 2012, then you had what I would call the multi-room viewing era. With multi-room viewing, you could share programs between multiple DVRs and receivers, but it wasn't really a centralized system. So where we are now, I would call the Genie era, which is working up to the Genie 2, where we really have one kind of centralized DVR, and that's all you have in your house. It just controls everything from there, and everything else is just clients that control and respond to that centralized DVR. There are a lot of folks who haven't quite bought into the Genie era, and of course back in what I call the multi-room viewing era, there were a lot of folks who didn't quite buy into that either. I hear you, folks. I get it. When you look at going from the original DirecTV system into the multi-room viewing era with high definition, you were talking about upgrading your dish, changing the kind of multi-switch that you had, and really changing an awful lot about who you are and what you were doing with your satellite TV system. And going to Genie, that's even further, because instead of having multiple redundant DVRs where you could kind of control and segment what you wanted from place to place, you were relying on a single system, a single point of failure is what a lot of folks would say, that really changes the way you have to look at stuff. So before I look at the pro side of this, let's look at the con side. Let's look at why you might want to just stay put with the equipment that you have. And if you do, by the way, I understand, and the great thing about solidsignal.com is that you can get a lot of that legacy equipment, you know, as long as we can get it, we're going to sell it to you. Simple as that. And oftentimes we will buy the last supplies of stuff, so you won't be able to get it anywhere else. And we try to sell it at a fair price for those people who are trying to keep an older system going. Why would you choose not to jump into the Genie or Hopper era? Well, honestly, sometimes it's just a matter of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. no matter what, no matter whenever you upgrade, there are always going to be things that aren't the same. And perhaps you have spent a lot of time, invested a lot of effort in customizing what you have to make sure it works exactly for you. And if it works exactly for you, great. Then keep it. Of course, you're going to have to know that at some point that's not going to be an option for you. At some point there is going to be an exit date where you just won't be able to get that older equipment that you could get before. And I hope for the folks who want to stay back in the multi-room viewing era or the pre-multi-room viewing era, that you can still get that stuff. And I really don't have an out for when that's going to really be a problem, but look, I do understand at some point it will. Now let's look on the other hand about those folks who have been saying, well, hey, give me a good reason and address some of those concerns that I have. And especially when people are talking about going to Genie, they talk about that single point of failure. What if my DVR goes down, and then if my Genie 2 goes down, I lose television everywhere? Okay. But you have to be aware of the fact that it's 2018 now, and we have options that you didn't have in 2006. You know, there have been a couple of times when I have lost satellite signal or had a cabling problem or whatever. There have been a few times when I've forgotten to record something or where I misunderstood what I was recording. And you see, today you have options. You can go to content provider websites and watch stuff there. You can stream it on your favorite streaming box. You see, that single point of failure is really only a single point of failure for satellite, and it's part of a much bigger ecosystem that includes streaming and over-the-air antenna and just going over to your friend's house. So you don't have to be this kind of fortress where you are the only one who has any control over what you record, and if you don't record it, you're completely lost. I get that feeling. That's how I felt too 15 years ago, but it just isn't true. And if you're not getting with the program, if you're not using the latest DirecTV and Dish equipment, then you're creating a point of failure down the road, because when your system does eventually fail, and it won't be on your schedule, I guarantee it, you're going to have to upgrade in a hurry, and you could be without service for some time because you just weren't prepared. And there won't necessarily be anything that can be done to get you that older equipment at that time, depending on when that failure occurs. You've already really seen this with folks who are in a traditional multi-switch environment. While we can still get those WB68 multi-switches that DirecTV needs, or some of the Eagle Aspen multi-switches that came before the Dish Pro products, they're getting harder and harder to find. And the dishes that work with them are getting harder and harder to find. If you're still on that level of system where you haven't even gone up to SWIM technology, you're going to find it very difficult already in 2018 to upgrade the way that you want to upgrade. And it's going to cause an even bigger failure when that stuff eventually does go, and it will. If you haven't upgraded to the Genie era or the Hopper era, it's easier and faster as long as you've got a relatively compatible dish, but you still could be waiting for a professional quality install, keeping in mind that when you're looking at a Hopper 3 or a Genie 2, it's very hard to install this stuff yourself. Not impossible, as long as you've got the right dish, but even aiming the dish takes a lot more expensive equipment than it used to. And where you might have done it yourself 25 years ago, maybe you're just not that kind of guy anymore, or gal anymore, who wants to climb up on the roof and do it all yourself. Maybe you do want a little bit of extra help. So I've gotten to the point where we're recording, and it's getting to be a very long podcast, and the question still hasn't been answered. Should you just take the jump now? Should you upgrade to the latest and greatest? Should you get with the program? Or is it okay to stand back? Well, ultimately, the decision is up to you, but I will say that eventually, at some point, you will get with the program. It's just the question of, is it going to be on your time, or is it going to be on a situation where you really need something, where you're relying on long supply lines and waiting for installation to get the thing that you should have upgraded to maybe a little bit earlier. I'd recommend that everybody take a serious look at their satellite TV system and decide when they should upgrade to the latest and greatest. Do it on your own schedule. And when you're ready, of course, give the folks at Solid Signal a call, 877-312-4547, and they will help get you everything you need, whether or not you need professional installation or whether or not you still want to do it yourself. We're here for you, and thank you, my friends, for waiting through this extremely long podcast, and I'll talk to you again next week.